Hey friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Mo, and today we will be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. This was originally created by Earl Grey Books and is that Chammy. I will link both of their channels down below. But we're just going to hop straight into the questions. The first question is the best book I've read this year. As of today, I have finished 100 books. So it's a little hard to pick one, but I picked a fiction, a nonfiction, and a poetry collection. I hope that's okay with you. If not, that's too bad, because I'm going to do it anyways. My fiction book that I want to highlight is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nanakwame Adjei-Brenyah. This book is so good. It is a dystopian novel that takes place in the future of the United States. To be honest, could be not that far away, which is terrifying. Very good for a dystopian author to write something that feels really realistic. Really terrifying for the state of the world, though. This book follows the CAPE program, and CAPE stands for Criminal Action Penal Entertainment, which is basically a live-streamed sporting event where prisoners who are put on death row can instead opt to compete and take part in the CAPE program. And so instead of death row and a life sentence, they would get a 3-year sentence of the CAPE program, where if they survive through all 3 years, they're set free. That's it. That's the end of the sentence. The thing is, though, the CAPE program is a bunch of gladiatorial fights to the death, right? So your likelihood of surviving 3 years of fights to the death very frequently is not very high. And so we follow a bunch of different people. Our two main characters are Loretta Thurwar and Hurricane Stax, who are two of the big dog competitors. People love them. Some people hate them, but mostly people love them. And we watch as, them in the arena and outside of the arena, because something about the CAPE program is that free for everyone in the United States to watch the death matches. But they have a paid streaming service that also records the prisoners outside of their time in the competition, right? So it's also a reality TV show. So we kind of see how that impacts both of them and also the relationship together because they're in love. So yeah, it is really, that's kind of the main storyline, and it's really powerful. But outside of them, we also get a bunch of other people. We get other people that are competing. We get people who are high up executives who are profiting off of this. We get the announcer. We get people who are protesting, who don't agree with the CAPE program. We get people who just watch it and enjoy it, right? We get a bunch of different perspectives, which is really cool. One of the things I loved the most about this book is that there is a character in here that we kind of meet later on, so I'll be kind of vague about this, but he has done something really terrible. So he is in prison. He has not opted to be in the CAPE program. He is in a regular prison. And the guard has decided that what he's done is so bad that he deserves to be tortured. So the guard has taken it on himself to torture this prisoner. And the inmate, we watch as kind of this torture destroys his psyche and kind of his fall into insanity. And then the repercussions of that. And in his section, there is the most gorgeous, it's terrifying and bad, but the most gorgeous religious imagery. And I just, it was heartbreaking to read. I think one of the complaints I see people have about this book is that there are footnotes. I do think you could read it and just skip over the footnotes. I think if footnotes bug you as a reader, if you don't read them, you'll be fine. Personally, I enjoyed the footnotes because there are two different kinds. So there are fictional footnotes, so footnotes that add context about this fictionalized world, but there are also footnotes that are very much real world facts, which I think add a lot of context, especially if you're not very familiar with the prison system in the United States. I think it adds a lot of really interesting and good context that I think would benefit you. I think this would also be a really great book club read, especially, if you want to have conversations about prison abolition, which you should. I think it would be a really great read, and I think it would be really great to pair it with a nonfiction, because I think this is really accessible, really can help start those conversations with people who don't know where to start with them. And I think pairing it with a nonfiction would be really helpful. I'm not going to talk too much about this nonfiction just because I didn't read it this year, but Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Y. Davis it's relatively short, and I think it would be a good pairing to read with Chain Gang All-Stars. So that is the best fiction book I've read this year. The best nonfiction book I've read this year, I don't have a physical copy. If Editing Me isn't lazy, I'll put in a picture. Editing Me might be lazy. Can't speak to how they're feeling, to be so real. But the best nonfiction book I've read this year was Legacy, A Black Physician Reckons with Racism in Medicine by Uche Blackstock. This is a memoir of Blackstock's life, both growing up around physicians, but also then going to school to become a physician, and then also becoming a physician, and then also her experience as a patient. So Uche Blackstock is a Black woman, and we just see her experience of racism in medicine, both as a patient and as a doctor, and it's so powerful. I think obviously there is a real issue with the medical system, especially how women, specifically women of color, also queer people and trans people, not being believed, right? Going to a doctor and not being believed for the symptoms that we're having or any questions or concerns we have about our bodies. And that is especially true for people of color. And so seeing Blackstock's experience both as a physician but also as a patient, I think is really powerful. And I think memoirs provide light in a way that just giving someone numbers and statistics can't. Obviously, there are plenty of statistics that can back up, racism in medicine, but sometimes people have a hard time processing the numbers and actually putting that with, an experience and really understanding it. And I think that Blackstock does a great job of just, showing the true experience, because it's her life. So that is my best nonfiction book. And then my favorite poetry collection I have read this year is Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear by Musab Abu Toha. This is a collection of poetry. This is both poems that Toha wrote in Gaza, but also being in the diaspora after leaving Gaza. So we get to see kind of a few perspectives as a Palestinian of what has happened and what was happening. This wasn't this was published before the current wave of the genocide, but Palestinians have been facing oppression and genocide by the Israelis for a while. So really powerful and strong poetry collection. It's relatively short, and I don't know if you can see it, but it is all tabbed up, and those are just my favorite lines. I am not the best oral reader, but I do want to read you a section just so you can kind of get a grasp of how powerful this poetry is. The first poem in here is relatively long, and there's a good combination of short poems and long poems in here, but the first poem is called Palestine A through Z, and it goes through each letter of the alphabet and ties that back to Palestine. And so B, the second section in here, goes, a book that doesn't mention my language or my country and has maps of every other place except for my birthplace, as if I were an illegitimate child on Mother Earth. Borders are those invented lines drawn with ash on maps and sewn into the ground by bullets. It's so good, and there are so many lines that are just as powerful. Obviously, you should be paying attention to the news, witnessing what's going on in Palestine, and also contacting your representatives, doing what you can, be it protest, donate, whatever, to help support people in Palestine and Congo and Sudan, where all the genocides are happening. But I also think one of the great things as readers that we can do is read from marginalized communities, but especially marginalized communities who are being targeted in genocides. And I think poetry is a really great way to kind of truly understand things that sometimes, once again, nonfiction sometimes can be really statistics heavy and not fully help you grasp the feelings that people are feeling during these times. So, yeah. So that is I was rambling for a while, but that is my answers to the first question, which is my best books. Next, we're going to talk about best sequels. I will try to be briefer on here, but I have two. So the first one is obviously a sequel. The first book in the series is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This book is so good, but this isn't the book I read, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But the second book in this series is Take a Hint, Danny Brown, also by Talia Hibbert, and it's so good! Whoever told Talia Hibbert to write romance did a huge favor to the romance genre. Hibbert is such a great author at writing compelling and interesting characters who are also dynamic. I love her books, and I think she does a great job at making the characters feel real and grounded in the world by providing them relationships outside of the romance, but not centering the other relationships, right? Like, we see that they are real people who talk to other humans, but in the romance novel, the romance is still central, which I love. The Take a Hint, Danny Brown book that I want to talk about is the second book in the Brown Sisters trilogy. So, once again, the first book is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. They can all be read individually, but I do think because Get a Life, Chloe Brown is good, you should read it first. I haven't finished the series yet, so I've only read the first two, but they're good. Take a Hint, Danny Brown is about Danny Brown. She's one of the sisters, and she is a PhD candidate. And so while she is working on her PhD, she is also teaching. And Danny Brown, has some issues with romance. She likes to have sex, but she doesn't like all the extra emotional things that romance comes with. And so she's kind of sworn off romance and only wants a friend who's a friend with benefits, basically. And that is what she wants. And so she has got her eye on a security guard at her work that she's like, hey, he's kind of cute. And it's a romance novel, so you know where things go, but it's really great, and I think you should probably read it. Hey friends, sorry, I accidentally hit the camera, so we're gonna hope that you're still mostly in the same angle. But the second sequel that I want to talk about is Fence Volume 6. This is by C.S. Picot, and then the illustrations are by Joanna the Mad. It's so good. If you like gay people and comics, you should read it. It is about Nicholas. He is right here on the cover, down here. And he has recently got into fencing. He, for some backstory reasons that you find out probably towards the middle of the first volume, he just likes fencing and he really cares about being good at it. But he's not had any formal training. He comes from a rather poor background, so he is really naturally good at fencing, but he's lacking a lot of technique and things that you need to actually be good at fencing. And so he is basically been accepted to King's Row on the condition that he gets into the fencing team because that's his scholarship and he can only afford to go to the school if he has his scholarship. And so we watch him as he tries out for the fencing team, how that goes for him, but also the friends that he makes and the more than friends that he makes. And it's cute and I love it. If you like Haikyuu, but it's actually canonically gay, then you should read this. I freaking love that comic series. So that is my best sequels. Question number 3 is a new release I haven't got to yet, but I want to. This is going to be Court of Wanderers by Rin Chipeka, which is the second book in a series. So the first book is Silver Under Nightfall. This is a queer polyamorous vampire romance. I was never a big vampire person growing up, but something this year, I don't know, something in my heart, I'm just like, I want to read all of the gay vampire stuff. So that kind of started with this. This book takes place in a fantasy world where there are humans and different courts of vampires, and the humans don't like vampires. The vampires in this world for the most part, are like sentient beings. Some of them can lose control and not be, but for the most part, a lot of them are like or basically humans, but hot, with superpowers, and drink blood. But our main character, Remy Pendergast, is a reaper, which basically a vampire hunter. And so he works for the kingdom, trying to gain the approval of his father and he hunts vampires. And due to some unfortunate circumstances, he discovers that there is like a weird mutation happening with some vampires that's turning them into basically unkillable monsters. They lose kind of their sentience, and they've just gone crazy. And so he ends up getting paired up with two very wealthy, well-known vampires, and he kind of has to work with both of them to figure out what's going on. It's fun. I do have some issues with this book. I'm not saying it's perfect. It feels, towards the beginning, it is pretty info dumpy in the way that, like, animes, if you watch anime, or even some manga, that they just kind of give you a lot of lore up front, so that when you get into the book, they don't have to explain things, which I'm okay with. But if you don't like info dumps, either you can power through the first few chapters or just maybe skip the book. But I felt like it was really fun. There were some really great conversations about consent, but then there were great conversations about consent, and then like a few pages later there was a scene that was supposed to be sexy, but was not a good representation of consent. And so I was like, that's unfortunate. So there were a few things that kind of like negated each other in my mind. It was also pretty predictable, but I'm normally okay with a pretty predictable story as long as I still feel like it's well written. And I do feel like for the most part this was well written. And I love Remy. Remy is like a himbo icon and is possibly having a gender crisis. There were some things in there that I was like, oh, I see you. Maybe next book we'll have a whole gender exploration moment. I don't know if that's true. Haven't read the second book yet. But hopefully next time I'm talking about this, Remy might have different pronouns. But right now, he, him is canonically true. We'll find out if that stays true. But anyways, it's queer, it's polyamorous, vampires, vampire hunters. There's a lot of sex in this book. And I just told you about a romance book. I don't mind a good sex scene. I won't say I like it. I don't mind one. There were parts in here that felt very repetitive, which was kind of unfortunate because there were some sex scenes that I was like, oh, okay, I see you. But then there were other ones where I was like, this is kind of boring. So, there's that, but it is what it is. I still overall really enjoyed it, and I specifically really liked Remy as a character, so I want to read the sequel. My most anticipated release for the second half of the year is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. I have read 2 books by Ava Reid right now, and those include Juniper and Thorn, which I read last year, and then A Study in Drowning, which I read this year, both of which were 4 stars for me, which is a pretty high rating for me. I know numbers and rating scales kind of vary for people, but 4 stars is a pretty high rating for me. I really like the way Ava Reid is able to write atmospheres. Like, you read her books and I feel like the world is so real. Like, reading A Study in Drowning, I was listening to the audiobook and I just felt like I was at a creepy beachside manor that was crumbling into the ocean. Like, I felt that in my bones, and it's so good. I do think there are some, issues with plot and pacing for if you are a plot-driven reader, but I'm not really. If you can make me feel a vibe, I can respect that. So that makes me very excited for Lady Macbeth because I want to read more of Ava Reid's descriptive writing. They're really good at it. I love that. I also feel like Ava Reid is really good at creating unreliable women narrators. Not exactly that they are, trying to purposefully deceive you, but that in both of the books I've read, they're a little unsure and confused about what's going on, so we can't, it's a little harder for us to figure out, is this a real thing? And I think like that would be really interesting with the story of Macbeth, specifically Lady Macbeth's portion in Macbeth. So I'm very excited. Plus, Macbeth is my favorite Shakespeare play. So, yay, I'm excited for that. The next thing is my biggest disappointment. And so for this, I have a stack. But they're all one series. Oh, well, now they're all one series out of order because I just dropped them. That's fine. So I grew up reading and watching Narnia. And I thought I had read all 7 books, but I'm realizing my parents only ever read me the first 4, slash I read. So I read The Magician's Nephew, I read Lion, Witch and the Lion, Witch and Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. But I never read The Silver Chair, The Horse and His Boy, or The Last Battle. And I think that was a smart decision on my parents' part, because those books are bad. Like, there is racism and a bunch of other, like, actual, like, terrible and morally incorrect things, but also they're bad. Like, they're not good books, in my opinion. So that's a little unfortunate. Like, the other books, because I reread the ones I had read, and then I read the new ones, and the first ones are okay. Like, the original ones, they're okay. I don't think they're as good as I thought they were as a kid, but, you know, I still overall enjoyed them. I think I like the movies more, but still, overall, good times. The last 3, I just think they are, first off, there are all kinds of moral issues with them, but second off, I think they're just bad books, which is a little disappointing. Not a little. It was very disappointing, because I read 7 books. I mean, they're relatively short, but, like, still. What the heck? What the heck? My biggest surprise was actually another sequel. So the sequel was Warrior of the Wind by Sui Davies Okumbawa. So good. But it's the second in a sequel, it's not a sequel. The second in a series. It is the sequel to Son of the Storm. I love this series. When I first read Son of the Storm, so I read it last year for the first time, and I enjoyed it while I read it. I thought it was a good book. But I did have some issues, and so I wasn't super excited. Like, when I finished this, I was like, I'll probably continue the series, but I do have some, like, issues with it. And so I was like, I'm not sure how excited I am for the sequel. But then, since I finished it, it was on the brain. Like, this book carved itself into my brain. I don't know how. But, like, this is, like, one of those books that, like, while I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is good. But when I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is good, but I don't know if it'll stick with me. It does, though. I think about this book at least once a week. And so then, I was like, I wonder why. You know, why? But I still wasn't super hyped about the sequel. Like, I wanted to read it because this was on the brain all the time. But I hadn't, like, built up any hype for it. And then I read it. And it was so good. And I was like, wow. I don't know what happened. This is so good. And now they're on my brain all the time, both of them. Anyways, what this series is called the Nameless Republic series, and basically we follow a few different characters. If you can't tell, I like books that follow multiple characters, but there's the city called Bassa, where Danso, our main character, lives, and he has studied his whole life, gone to, like, a very elite school here, but something happens and he becomes aware of some information that the government might be hiding from him, both about magic, but also about their power and where they are in the world. And so we kind of follow him as he has an identity crisis, but also as he is kind of removed from his life as it was and discovers a new way. And this book, the author held no punches. Like, there were so many things in here. Like, I thought it was good, you know, like, I really did think it was good, but there were things in here that I never could have possibly guessed. And not that there weren't, like, hints at it, but just, I was like, oh, there's no way the author will do that. And he did. And he did it well. They're really good. You should read both of them. Yeah. Also, the villain, I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to spoil it, but I love her with my whole heart. And that's not because she's like, oh, she's kind of good. No, she is evil. She is evil. But she's hot. And I gotta respect it. The next question is my new favorite author. So those first 3 authors I talked about are all favorites, but also Selby Wynne Schwartz, who wrote After Sappho. So I finished this 2 days ago, so there might be some recency bias happening here. But this book is gorgeous. It is a collection of vignettes that are told from like this third-person perspective. Basically, if you're familiar with Greek plays, it is basically a Greek chorus, which is really interesting because the entire main theme of this is about feminist icons who were inspired by Sappho. And Sappho was a Greek poet, also a lesbian icon, so it's a really cool way to play with form. It also, since we follow these vignettes, there are about 5 to 10 characters that we follow and we watch as their lives intertwine, and it's really beautiful and gorgeous. Schwartz has another book out that is about drag, so I'm really interested in reading that. The next question is my newest fictional crush, and I don't really get fictional crushes, but if I was to pick someone, I would probably pick Remy Pendergast, just because he is a himbo, he's an icon, love that boy. My newest favorite character, though, is Murderbot from All Systems Red, which is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries novella series, which is basically a series that follows Murderbot, who is a sec unit is what they're called, but basically a sec unit is this machine that has been created with the purpose of defending the people that it has been contracted out to defend, and also to kind of protect the interests of this unnamed corporation or company. I think it's just called the company. But Murderbot has hacked its own sec unit, so it has gained consciousness, and it's trying to make sure people don't know that, because if the company finds out that it has consciousness, all kinds of bad things could happen. So it's basically trying to do its job as best as it can, but also it just wants to stay in its room and watch reality TV, which is such a mood. But we kind of follow as Murderbot is figuring out who it is, and I love it. Yeah. I'm excited to continue that novella series. The next question is a book that made me cry. No books have made me cry this year that I could think of, but I picked a nonfiction memoir that I think had the capability to make me cry had I not been driving and actively trying not to cry, because, I was driving in traffic in the downtown area where I live, and I would prefer not to crash my car. So that book would be Slow Noodles by Chantha Gyon, and it has contributions by Kim Green. This is a memoir about Gyon's life in Cambodia, and her life as a war refugee, both we hear before she became a refugee and then also as the war was breaking out, how that impacted her. I think the most powerful thing about this memoir is that it goes through recipes that the author associates in her mind with specific times in her life, right? So she'll teach us a recipe and then tell us the story of what memories that recipe conjures for her. And it is just gorgeous. I think it shows, the power of food, but also it shows the impacts of war and refugee camps in a really powerful way. And I think that it's gorgeous. The book that made me happy. So a lot of the books I've read have made me happy because they've been good, but an actual genuine happy book that I read is going to be The City of Dreaming Books by Walter Moors. This is a book that has been translated from German to English. It is a part of a series, but this is the only one I've read. And if I'm correct, I think you can read all of them as standalones. I read this one can for sure be read as standalone. I haven't read the other one, so I can't speak to them. But I think that all of them can be read as standalones. But this follows this dinosaur alien kind of creature. They're on a completely different planet than us, but this dinosaur alien kind of creature named Optimus Yarnspinner. Optimus Yarnspinner has inherited this manuscript from his godfather, who is basically, it's an unpublished manuscript, and neither him or his godfather know who the author is. But it is the most gorgeous and funny, but also like heartbreaking story that either of them have ever read. And so now Optimus Yarnspinner has decided that he's going to go out and figure out who the author is. So he travels to Bookholm, which is basically this huge sprawling city that is completely dedicated to books, from, book performances, like readings of books, to publishing houses, to, just places that authors hang out, to bookstores. The entire city is dedicated to books. But under the city is this large, sprawling complex called the catacombs. And the catacombs are basically a collection of books that have been hidden underground to help preserve them. So there are some really expensive books that are hidden down here. So book hunters will break into the catacombs, not really break into, they're allowed to go in there, but they'll go into the catacombs and they'll fight each other, they'll fight traps and monsters to try to rescue, quote unquote, the most expensive books, and then they'll escape and they'll sell them. So Optimus Yarnspinner has entered Bookholm with the intent to figure out who is the author of this manuscript, and somehow he ends up in the catacombs and he has to find his way out. It was funny, it was witty, there were cool conversations about literature, but also just like good goofs and romps. I enjoyed it. The next question is the most beautiful book I bought this year, and that is going to be an Encyclopedia of Tolkien by David Day. This book is gorgeous. It has golden sprayed edges, it is embossed, it has gorgeous pictures inside. I will never read this, but I purchased it because I have a Tolkien shelf and I think that this will look gorgeous on it. And I'm like reading through, I've read and reread The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings series many a times, but now I'm kind of reading through all the history and lore of Middle-earth, and I think that this would be a good point of reference. Realistically, I will probably just use the wiki, but I like to pretend like I can be analog and read this, like just look up what I'm looking for. I probably won't, but it looks pretty on my shelf. And then the next question is, what books do I need to read before the end of the year? My goal this year was kind of to get down my physical TBR. It was at like 85 at the beginning of the year. My goal is to get it down to 25. It is currently at 65, so I'm not doing the best, but I'm trying. So I need to read at least 40 more books, but I for sure need to finish at least my current reads. So the physical current reads I have are Palestine, A 4,000 Year History by Nur Masala. This book is a really powerful and historical text, but it is very dense. I don't know if I would recommend it to everyone. I think there are some more accessible reads about Palestine if you have little to no knowledge, but I do think that this book is a really good point of reference to have if you're having conversations with Zionists and want to be able to debunk the myth that Palestine is a new thing. This book goes from the late Bronze Age all the way to present day and tells us about the creation and evolution of Palestine and the Palestinian people, and it is really powerful and a good resource. Once again, I just don't know if it is the most accessible for beginners. There's also some really interesting conversations in here about not using religious text as basis for our history, which I agree with. I do wish there was kind of more nuance in that discussion, but as of this point, I've only read the introduction, so that my opinion on that could change because, I've pretty much just read the thesis. So there's that. The other physical book that I'm reading right now is a translated work that has been translated from Japanese, and that is Honeybees and Distant Thunder by Riku Unda. This book was was translated from Japanese to English, and it follows these 3 different students who are all competing in a piano competition with the goal to win. So we get to watch them as their lives intersect at this small coastal town in Japan where they're competing, and we see how their lives intertwine, but we also get to learn about each of them and their connection to piano and music. The only other book that I am currently reading that I want to finish before the end of this year is an audiobook that I'm listening to through Libby. Shout out to my local library, love them. But that is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is a very popular book, so you've probably heard about it, but basically we follow Elizabeth Zott, who is a chemist, and due to some unforeseen life event, she ends up being the host of a very widely popular cooking show where she teaches women to cook, but also maybe she teaches them a little bit more. We get to watch both kind of how she's ended up at this point in her life when she wanted to be and was a chemist. And it's in the 1950s through the 1960s, so we can see a lot of kind of what it was like to be a woman at that time. And I think it's really great so far. I'm only 20% into it, but so far it's really good. Hey friends, Editing Mo here. I just realized I didn't answer a question, so I wanted to hop on and answer the last question, which is my favorite book community members. These are going to be my favorite booktubers that I've been enjoying the past few months, and so those will include Dee from Don't Fret Read Books, Will from MB Reads, Martine from Just Martine, Sage from Sweetly Sage, and Tia from Tia Chu. They all have very different vibes, but I love them all. They're all great. So shout out to them. And then also, thank you if you stayed around and watched this long. I really appreciate it, and I hope you found a good book recommendation. Bye!